Hello everyone, Ranger DPS back with another video, this time a melee DPS tier list for raid in 9.2. I got a lot of awesome feedback on my range DPS tier list. It got shared by people in the community. THD liked that Affliction Warlock was in the dumpster. Got shared on Liquid Max's stream, which was super awesome. Got some great feedback, and I'm going to go ahead and try and implement as much of that as I can in this melee one here. I went ahead, got dark mode going. There were some complaints about that, and I want to preface this list by saying this is for double legendary plus tier sets for mythic progression in 9.2. Obviously, world first is more than likely going to only be one legendary. At the moment, it looks like double legendary is going to unlock a little bit later, I think 8 weeks into the patch cycle, and world first race should be over at that point. So what you see during world first progression might be a little bit different than what I'm showing here. That's because some of these classes that I might be ranking highly won't really come online as much until the double legendaries come out. So just keep that in mind. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hop into it right away here. I'm going to start off with Windwalker Monk. Windwalker found its place in 9.1 due to their mass AoE potential. They dominated the Mythic Plus meta. Their single target wasn't the worst, but it was towards the bottom end. And in 9.2, their tier set, unfortunately, has been bugged since its inception. And as a result, it's kind of hard to say what their power level will actually be. In typical Windwalker fashion, the bugs are coming out of their clones, out of Storm, Earth, and Fire. And, their tier set is essentially supposed to serve as a stacking buff. You get up to 10 stacks, and then your next 3 abilities are buffed. But the clones don't generate stacks, but they eat the stacks, so all 3 of your stacks can go away on one ability, and it only applies on the first tick. So lots of super messy stuff going on with Windwalker. And on top of that, they received a pretty sizable nerf in the February 2nd round of patch tuning, where their Bone Dust Brew Necrolord ability, which was their main covenant that enabled their massive AoE, can no longer critically strike. So it got a 5% damage buff, but this is nowhere near as significant as losing the ability to critically strike. Windwalker AoE, it was massive crit Bone Dust Brew plus Spinning Crane Kick and GG procs. And so it's going to be a big hit for them in M+, but it also hits kind of their purpose and their niche in raid. Sure, they still bring a raid buff with Mystic Touch, but with Mistweaver and Brewmaster looking pretty solid, I'm going to go ahead and put Windwalker down in C tier. I think it's not really looking that great for them. Their tier set's kind of a mess at the moment. And, I mean, their 2-piece buffs Fists of Fury, which when they play Kyrian is something they cancel the ability. So, yeah, Windwalker, not in the greatest spot. Next up, I'm going to go Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc is looking strong in 9.2. Not only did they bring a required raid buff in Chaos Brand, 5% magic damage increase, but they also offer Darkness, which is a strong raid defensive, and those 2 things alone give them a big leg up on other melee. I want to preface this next part by saying we're not even on a release candidate build, and PTR sims, as much as a lot of really hard work from the community goes into them, they can be kind of cringe in the way that, APLs aren't optimized, stats aren't optimized for the characters, eye level scaled down to 252, all sorts of stuff, so don't put too much stock into them. But at the same time, Venthyr double Lego Havoc DH is simming pretty crazy high on single target. I'm talking a top 3 class, and with the amount of raid utility they bring, I know a lot of Demon Hunters don't love the Venthyr build, but if their numbers are pumping on single target, I think they're going to be pretty high up there. I'm going to go A tier. They're not top of the top, and that's just one sim I've seen. I've seen some crazy stuff with the rogue specs. So at the moment, I'm going to put Havoc Demon Hunter solidly in A tier. I think they're borderline S tier, but I'm not sure if we're going to be stacking them. Like we saw a lot of double Demon Hunter at the beginning of 9.1 in the race, but I don't think it's going to be a hard stack class, so I'm tempted not to put them S tier. Next, I'll go Fury Warrior. Well, actually, both Warrior specs, Fury and Arms. I'll start with Fury. I think this class is going to be super strong in 9.2. They offer really great single target, and from everything I've read up on, they have a really solid tier stat that gives them a significant amount of power, but also synergizes with their build really well. Not only that, but they bring Warrior buff, as well as a Rallying Cry, which is one of the strongest raid CDs from a non-healer. And I can see Warrior being potentially a class you want to stack multiple of, and Fury is looking like the stronger single target DPS Warrior. I think that puts them in at S tier. Rallying Cry is just so insane. Max HP increase allows you to survive mechanics that would kill you otherwise. You don't have to stack up to use it like on Darkness, so it's got more flexibility on fights where you need to spread out. Looks like there's going to be some pretty high movement fights in 9.2, so I think that lends itself to the Warrior raid defensive. And a lot of the stuff I just talked about obviously applies to arms as well. And kind of goes back to the insanely high value of warriors in general with raid buff plus strong raid cooldown. And, you know, even if their DPS was B tier, warriors probably just become A tier because of the utility that they bring in those two facets. And even though it looks like Fury's going to be the stronger one, arms is a massive beneficiary of Wind Fury Totem. And I'm going to talk about that next, but Enhancement Shaman's looking like it's going to be in a really good spot. We saw it in the 9.1 World First race. We saw it in a lot of 9.1 progression where you had an Enhancement Shaman party that was buffing up Arms Warriors, and Havoc Demon Hunters, when using Demon Blades, get a fair bit of value out of it. So if we're seeing a lot of Enhancement Shaman, this raises Arms Warrior stock. Because they're the biggest beneficiary of that Wind Fury Totem. And so I can see, depending on tuning, Warriors, they both have the potential to be S tier. I'm going Fury S and Arms A due to Fury looking like it has the stronger damage at the moment. But Warrior is in a really good spot going into 9.2. I mentioned Enhancement Shaman, so we'll go into that next. They bring Wind Fury Totem, which is a buff to auto attacks of the melee in your party. It's party specific, not a full raid-wide cooldown. But they also have insane single target DPS. With their Witch Doctor's Wolfbones build, their tier set has really good synergy with their double legendaries. They fit really well into Night Fae, which is great for prog with Pod Tender. This class is like really hard to kill. They have an instant heal Onk, lots of good things going for them. Max HP increase with Earth Ellie, and plus they're buffing on their melee. There's a great synergy there. They're one of the top single target specs. There's just so much going for Enhancement Shaman. I think they're going to be S tier. If they're in 9.1, their overall damage is towards the bottom on a lot of logs, but they're still really strong in pure single target, which is how they build around the legendary that they play. Their tier set goes into that further and makes them potentially one of, if not the top single target specs in 9.2, especially if you count the benefit they bring with Wind Fury Totem on top of their already strong personal damage. Next, I'm going to go Rogue. Rogues have been dominant in 9.1. If you look at like Mythic Guardian, Rogues are absolutely slamming. They have like all three of the top 3 spots. And if you go to like a 95 percentile on Mythic Guardian, and so you know they are slamming in single target. And I don't think that's going away in 9.2. Sub's tier set was looking insanely strong. It did get some nerfs just now in the February 2nd tuning. So you can see here, Shadow Strike had a 15% chance to grant Shadow Blades, down to 20%, and the finishing moves are down to a 3% from 4% chance per combo point spent to cast Shadow Strike at up to 5 nearby targets. Sub looks like they could potentially have the strongest single target of any of the rogue specs. Obviously, Assassination kind of held that crown in 9.1. It's hard to say which one will necessarily have it in 9.2. At the moment, it's looking like Sub. They're also going to be monsters in Mythic Plus with their AoE and funnel opportunities. And, you know, you look at everything that Rogue brings to the table with Cheat Death, immunes with their cloak. They've got great utility. It's not like raid-wide buffs in utility, but they still bring a lot to the progression environment, as well as insane single-target DPS. I see it as very viable to stack multiple rogues. You know, potentially you've got 2 rogues in your Wind Fury party with warriors or DHs, depending on what you have access to. And, you know, a lot of that applies to Assassination as well. Also really strong single target. They were really big in 9.1 with what they're able to do with their Envenoms and Winds of Winter. Obviously they're losing the Frost set, but they still have really strong single target. I'm going to put them A tier, and that's basically kind of the same thing as Warrior, where, you know, the Rogue as a whole and Warrior as a whole are probably both S tier, and then I'm kind of sorting them out here based on what it looks like their tuning is at the moment, which is Sub on top, Assassination in A tier, and then I'm going to put Outlaw in B tier. In Sanctum of Domination, Outlaw was generally the lowest single target of the 3 rogue specs. You know, again, like you can go look at logs, you can kind of see that. And as much as the class suffers from their strict target cap and AoE, that's not really going to impact them in raid too much. And I think rogues, kind of like niche in raid, is their single target, and in subs case, I know they have some final options. Next, I'm going to go Feral Druid, and I think this class is going to fill the same strong single target niche as rogue, but obviously it doesn't bring the immunes. Instead, you bring Stampeding Roar, raid movement ability. There's only 2 options for this. You've got Druids and Shamans. And unfortunately, Feral doesn't bring Innervate. Otherwise, with Disc Priest being a steady contender at the World First level and Mistweaver showing incredible throughput potential despite some nerfs that they got in the February 2nd patch notes, they may yet still be on top. And those are 2 mana-hungry healers that can benefit a lot from Innervate at the right timings. Unfortunately, Feral doesn't have that. Give Feral Innervate, but, lower some Boomkin stocks, but oh well. I've seen some clips of the tier set on Feral doing crazy AoE. I think Cyber had one go kind of viral. It did 250 plus K in a key on PTR, just massive AoE, and that did get nerfed in this most recent set of tuning. Feral 4-piece now deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets. But for raid, that doesn't really matter. Their niche was single target in 9.1. They're still going to have that same strong single target in 9.2. And I'm going to go A tier with Feral Druid. If you look at Sylvanas, it was Boomkins obviously dominating. Everyone's kind of aware of that. Their ability to ramp and Starfall on the chains, solo the intermission, and still provide strong single target burst for like the Colossus on the left side and the hero phase at the end in the P3 burn. But Feral Druid was competitive with, they were putting up near Boomkin numbers on that fight, and they were doing it just by slamming the boss. Feral Druid is in a good spot right now for raid, for single target, and although they don't bring a raid buff, that's kind of like the only knock against them in a really competitive melee field, is that they don't bring a raid buff. But damage profile wise, they're in a good spot. So I'm going to put them A tier. I think they've got the potential to be up there and have a really good tier. Next, I'll go Rep Paladin. And while Feral Druid is looking to have a good tier, Rep Paladin is not. Rep Paladin was a pretty average DPS in 9.1. They kind of were middle of the pack, maybe towards the bottom end. Across the board, they had a couple good fights like Banesmith, but from what I've seen, they have one of the worst tier sets, like Affliction Warlock tier levels of bad. They have an immune with Bubble, but they're overall a relatively squishy class. They don't offer much with their tier set. They don't have strong single target. They don't have crazy AoE. And with no clear niche and no clear strengths and no, good-looking damage, it's D tier for Rep Paladin. I think if you're like a Paladin enthusiast and that's all you want to play, it's probably Prop Paladin this tier for you. As much as Diva Aura is very valuable, it looks like you're probably going to want to get that elsewhere from Holy Paladin or a really strong looking Prop Paladin in 9.2. Next we'll go DK specs. We'll leave Survival Hunter for last since it's kind of a unique one. DK had it pretty rough in Sanctum of Domination with both specs sitting pretty bottom tier as far as melee went. AMZ still has decent value, but it's not the magical defensive powerhouse that it once was. And their DPS and single target and AoE is severely lacking. But the Frost tier set seems to have brought them back toward middle, potentially upper middle of the pack. However, in a very competitive melee field, I think it's kind of hard to place them above B tier. With it looks like it's their dual hand Obliterate build that's simming the best in single target at the moment. But Breath gives them pretty good options. It's also way more fun in AoE and Cleave. So I think Frost is solid B tier. Unholy is actually an interesting one. At the moment, Unholy seems to be slightly behind Frost in terms of overall DPS, but Unholy does offer something very unique. It has a niche strength that it brings to the raid, and that's execute damage. If I head over to the 9.2 patch notes here, I can see that the class set for Unholy, Soul Reaper, now grants 25%, up from 20%, so 5% damage buff to your minions when it strikes something below 35% health. So, Soul Reaper, which is what enables DK's execute, or Unholy DK specifically is Execute, now is going to buff up all your minions. So if you have a fight that's really challenging, potentially a DPS check at the end, or it's just the hardest phases at the end, Unholy DK might be able to offer massive amounts of Execute damage to really ease that fight. Again, AMZ, pretty solid. You get that hero burn at the end, you're going to be able to have army plus Execute amped up. You might not be the strongest overall, but Unholy has clear benefits. So it has something clear that it can bring to the raid instead of just being like a generally mediocre average tier DPS. So I could see there being fights where it rises to A or S tier. I think overall, them not being like consistently strong outside of Execute kind of puts them middle of the pack, but there's potential for Unholy DK to have a little bit more strength, same way that Frost kind of benefits like you when you have cleave scenarios. And still, they do bring AMZ. That is some important raid utility. It's just not as strong as it once was. And then last we have Survival Hunter. I don't really know how to rank this class. By all accounts, it's in an insanely strong state right now, but part of that is due to a number of bugs. Their February 2nd patch notes were, kind of confusing, or maybe confusing, but like ominous. We fixed several issues that caused the damage from set bonuses to be higher than intended. It doesn't really say which bugs they fixed. There's a ton. I went to the Survival Hunter class Discord, and there are like 7 currently active bugs with the tier set and legendary interactions. Stuff's giving them too much cooldown reduction. Stuff is giving them double dipping on their legendaries, impact on their bombs. If you have 2 Survival Hunters, only 1 Survival Hunter bombs are landing. Some of the buffs aren't applying to Shrapnel Bomb, aren't applying to their dots, so it's really hard to speculate where Survival Hunter is going to end up, but I'm going to leave them S tier due to their potential. They've shown to still be competitive in the single target field while having, by far and away, the strongest AoE of almost anything right now. It's possible that they're going to be gunning for Windwalker's spot in Mythic Plus, but this is a raid tier list, so I'll keep it to that. They're going to have strong AoE for fights that require that, while not being too much of a hindrance on single target. So it's hard to say where the tier set's going to end up. You could see Survival Hunter kind of tumble down the rankings and back to kind of a familiar spot near the bottom if their tier set, loses a lot of its potency due to bug fixes. But at the moment, they're looking like it could be Year of the Spear. There's potential for Survival Hunter to pop off, so I'm going to leave them up here at S tier for Survival tier, I guess. Anyway, this is my melee DPS tier list for raid in 9.2 with double legendary and tier sets. Keep that in mind. Please, I would appreciate any feedback in the comments. Like, subscribe, and let me know, how you think your class fared, or if you think it should be somewhere different. And best of luck preparing these. I hope your class ended up where you want it for 9.2.